Well, once again, I have great reason to be proud of the city that I call home. I had thought that I'd have little reason to bother with local politics ever again after my last foray into it a couple of years ago, when the CCPA labeled my city the worst city to be a woman in because we had the horribly bad taste to actually let men's rights activists exist in a section of space-time relatively adjacent to that of the female population. But apparently I'm destined to do this dance again and again every once in a while. The reason I don't usually concern myself with local stuff is generally two parts focusing on the bigger picture, and one part cannot be asked to care. So you can imagine how much this one pisses me off, to bring me out of the Dorito and XCOM 2 induced coma that I've been languishing in for the past few weeks to actually mention it. This here is the mayor of my city, Don Iverson. He's been the mayor here for too long. Just to give you some background, if you want to understand the man, just picture the most useless politician in the world crossed with an even more useless politician. How useless? Well, this is the high-level bridge that spans the river through Edmonton. It's one of the city's oldest landmarks. My city has one of the highest suicide rates in the country, and for a very long time there's been a noted tradition of people committing suicide by throwing themselves off the bridge. No one actually keeps exact numbers, and it's slightly different depending on which authority you ask, but it's generally safe to say that it's about 6 people in a bad year that go off the bridge, with about 125 being the average number of suicides in general. A couple of years ago, it finally occurred to the city council that maybe they should do something about this phenomenon. To that end, they met with a bunch of experts, and one of the many brilliant ideas that they came up with was to put a $3 million fence along the bridge that would prevent people from jumping off. I guess using that money for mental health work would have just been silly. It's not like anybody who wanted to kill themselves could have possibly found any different or easier way to do it than to drive all the way downtown, climb onto the railings of a bridge, and throw themselves off. The CMHA's support network is so underfunded that they have to raise through donations half of their yearly $500,000 budget for their suicide hotline. Similarly, for other mental health programs and organizations who receive very little to no government support, unlike, say, cancer research or heart disease, which are politically much sexier and probably put out more often. If you ask police or hospital staff, they'll often tell you that when people attempt to commit suicide, the emergency room is so busy that the person rarely receives any psychiatric care during their stay, and there is usually no follow-up. Similarly, many people who leave the hospital after a suicide attempt often have no family or support network to rely upon. But, fuck that. Maybe one of these days we could get together and discuss the problems that affect the mostly men who commit suicide, and their feelings, and what are concrete solutions to the problem. Come to think of it, why do we never do that?
This is what men's rights look like! This is what men's rights look like!
Oh, right. Anywho, here is the fence that they eventually settled upon. Now, if you're wondering what the problems are with it, aside from the whole, $3 million thing, here is a photo of the Edmonton man who defeated the Fort Knox-like defense system put in place through an unconventional and entirely unforeseen tactic. He bent and climbed under it. I'm going to say that again, because it bears repeating. He bent down and stepped under the $3 million fence that was supposed to keep him out. This is the kind of political planning that fucks were invented for. Believe it or not, that's far from the only flaw in the fence. I could easily get enough material for another whole video just to describe the pure fail inherent in this project. But this was just to give you an idea of exactly what it was that we're dealing with here when talking about a project that has our beloved mayor attached to it. Now then, on to the meat of the subject. This is Jesse Lipscomb, an actor and producer who has done quite more than a few movies and TV shows. A few days ago, he was supposedly doing a filming for a commercial for the city when some guys in a car pulled up and, for no apparent reason, screamed, "The niggers are coming! The niggers are coming!" So after hearing this random racial slur from these completely random men who stopped for some random reason to harass some random black dude, Jesse walked over to their car and confronted them. Somehow. I don't know, maybe he batted his eyes coquettishly in their direction or something. I can't really say what he said or did because that part is missing from the video and audio that they produced. The camera is running, but once it gets to the car, the cameraman apparently got distracted by a random bird flitting about because they point the camera off into the distance, and the audio for some reason doesn't record the conversation going on right next to it, even though it picked up "the niggers are coming" from about half a block away just fine. And this is Rikash Walters, an organizer from Black Lives Matter, because of course you knew they would be involved somehow, who was the one who brought this video to the mayor's attention in the first place. This prompted Jesse to launch a new initiative to combat racism with the mayor's support called Make It Awkward, in which people are encouraged to call out racism, sexism, and all of those other isms by making the conversation awkward and embarrassing for the person making the comment. Don, why can't you just snort coke off the back of Vietnamese hookers like a normal mayor? I mean, seriously, Don, do you really have nothing else to do with your time than worry over a single case of maybe racism? What about unemployment? What about the buggered up economy? What about that horrendous clusterfuck of a stadium project you just finished? Or the other clusterfuck that is the LRT system? How about the rising rate of theft and robbery because of the aforementioned economic problems? Can you really not find more important work to do than to listen to these people? So before we continue, I just want to be clear here on something. We have a lesser known and largely irrelevant actor slash producer slash athlete who did a video that just happened to be interrupted by a bizarre and baffling example of random racism seemingly from nowhere. That was endorsed and used by a proponent of Black Lives Matter to spur an incompetent and largely unelectable SJW mayor into supporting a new initiative to combat quote-unquote racism by tone policing people for what amounts to wrongthink. While said actor mugs for the camera, and news media talks about how he was exposed to racism and calling for action against said wrongthinkers, spreading this one incident all across the nation's media and calling for a conversation. I cannot be the only one here who finds this dodgy as all fuck. This could only be more suspect if they had gone begging for money by starting a... Oh, there are no middle fingers big enough. Yep, they've got a funding campaign going, 'cause the rich guy needs money. Money to help him do... something strangely vague and ambiguous. No, seriously, I have read this page several times, and I still have no idea of what they actually need $50,000 for. They say something about PR materials, videos, experts, etc. But if your goal is to just start a conversation, you would think that all you would need to do is get some people to sit at a table and talk to them. You know, invite some of the soldiers of Odin around for a dinner and see how they think. Let them talk and voice their opinions. Make counter-arguments and televise it. It shouldn't be too hard. Every news outlet is already lining up to give you the most sumptuous media blowjob imaginable, and it certainly wouldn't cost anywhere near what you're asking for. See, starting a conversation means, actually conversing, like with other people, not just making a bunch of videos and promotional materials to tell everyone what you think they should do, or going to schools in front of a captive audience of students and telling them what they should be doing. That's called preaching. Now, to be fair, their funding page does say that they plan to produce a mission statement sometime. At some point. In the future. In a few weeks, maybe. But it might just be me being crazy again, but shouldn't you have had the mission plan first, then ask people to give you money? I mean, if I was going to ask people to give me 50 large, I would at least make sure I could tell them what I was going to do with it first. Which I noticed was actually asked by one of their commenters as well, to which she apparently never received an answer, even though there are only 2 comments and they took the time to answer the other woman. I mean, obviously I can't say that this was for sure orchestrated, on at least some level, but come on, it's at least a very suspicious set of circumstances, the sort of thing that a decent media would want to look into. Or they could just lap it up like the sycophantic lapdogs that they are. My bad. Look, I won't deny that being called a nigger out of hate has happened to me, twice, in my entire 33 years of life, but the people in this particular ideological clique have a noted history of faking things like this in order to get people outraged and give them license for their dictatorial behavior, so you'll forgive me if I'm more than a little skeptical about this. But from that one comment, we now have an entire initiative to thought police everyone. This is what we're coming to in my country. We have a campaign spreading via hashtag across the country, even getting the Prime Minister's attention because of one childish man who's sad because someone called him a nigger. According to Mr. Lipscomb, we have a new campaign about what bystanders can do. What can you do? I think he meant what you can do when you see something like this on the street or at home. Okay, two things before we get to the meat of this. First, if you have someone who is actually racist and really does hate, say, black people, do you think that publicly shaming him and embarrassing him or making him feel awkward is actually going to make him hate blacks less or more? See, your brilliant idea is not actually going to do anything about racism. Not that I think you really want to, but at best it will make it fester. Instead of it being out in the open, they'll go to private forums and their circles of like-minded friends, and circle jerk about it in echo chambers where they'll stew over those uppity Negroes who forced them underground. Much as with my example from the bridge, you won't actually be dealing with any of the underlying causes of it. And two, Jesse, Donny Boy, who decides what is and is not acceptable in this equation? For instance, I would point out, and I have a lot, very frequently, that Black Lives Matter and the people that belong to and support it are predominantly narrow-minded racists. Largely because they are. But somehow I don't think that you're going to be calling them out anytime soon. Or the sexism of feminism. I mean, I don't know if you call yourself a feminist, Jesse, but I know Don does, and I feel fairly sure that you won't be calling out their racism and sexism. What about racism and discrimination against white people, which we'll get to in a minute? Are you cool with that, or are you going to call it out? Where is your make it awkward in the face of things like this? Or is it already awkward enough for you? What about the people who are okay with the things that are making you cry? The off-color jokes and the ribald comments? The one who are okay with people having other opinions that they might not like? See, you listen to something like this.
If you smell something funny when you walk down the street, you're in Coontown. You look and see garbage all over the street, you're in Coontown.
And you go, my God, racism! It must be removed! Censor, censor! Where's my safe space? Give me a cuddle! I hear that, and I find it fucking hilarious. And for those who are wondering whether that song was meant seriously or not, the answer is yes. The guy who wrote that song is a white supremacist musician that calls himself Johnny Rebel. It's not satire, he really does mean every word of what he's saying, and it is awesome. I love his music because it is so hilarious to listen to this shit. Of course the guy's a complete racist whack job and an idiot, but that's why it's funny. It's hilarious how retarded this guy is, and I want other people to see this shit. It's so completely unapologetic, and I respect the man for that. Besides, it's catchy. This is how one combats bad ideas, not by driving them away, by embracing them and bringing them into the light and showing everyone how the Emperor truly has no clothes. I want people to see this kind of thing, because I want people to learn the lessons from it, and to also enjoy it for what it is. In order for society to have a soul, it has to allow all aspects of it to be shown. It's usually the offensive things that have the most to teach us, because the inoffensive things are usually inoffensive because they're telling us things we already want to hear. For instance, one of the important lessons that we can learn is what hate-based racism actually looks like. Instead of, oh, I don't know, looking at the scenario of a rich black celebrity who gets called a nigger by one random guy, sends out a video that is broadcast all over the country, receiving unilateral support and praise, even to as far as the Prime Minister himself, while getting a gentle reach around from the whores in the media, and then preaching a message of how there is a race problem in the country that is taken completely seriously instead of laughed into the gutter. If this is a race problem, then South Africa must be wall-to-wall Mai Tais, pizzas, and big-titted hookers strapped to other big-titted hookers. Look, Johnny Rebel there is not a politician. He's in no position to cause anyone harm, and even if he does, there are laws for that. If he actually does anything to harm anyone out of his hate, that is a crime. So all he can do is toss his ideas out into the world, and I have no fear of ideas, because I'm not a 5-year-old. I am a grown-up man. A society that doesn't allow for offense is a society that loses its soul. How many of the great classics and beloved pieces of art or media from our childhood do you remember that were racist?
Let's go back a million years to the very first Indian prince. He'd kiss a maid and start to blush, and we've all been blushing since. The guide right from the headland, the real true story of the red man, no matter what's been written or said.
Or how about this?
I seen a front porch swing, heard a diamond ring. I seen a polka dot railroad tie, but I be done seen about everything when I see an elephant fly.
Huckleberry Finn, Blazing Saddles, etc. But we loved them because they tell us things about ourselves, or they show the funny and the silly in our racial identities and stereotypes and teach us to laugh at them and ourselves. Racism and sexism do not necessarily equal hate, but that seems to be a distinction that is lost on certain people, and I'm willing to bet that Jesse and Dawn lack the mental acuity to recognize the difference as well. But see, how is someone supposed to know whether they're talking to a black person like me, who enjoys and welcomes things like nigger jokes, or a black person like Jesse, who can't even stand to hear the word without a comforting hug and a soft sob? If they'll be humiliated the instant they open their mouth, did it ever occur to you that maybe not everyone is as soft and fragile? Who gave you the right to impose your standards on everyone else? Because they are your standards, and this is what you are doing, despite the fact that I know you would try to lie and claim otherwise. That is the entire crux of this initiative, and why you haven't actually laid out any concrete plans or definitions. I left some articles on Lowbar for people to peruse, and it has some videos of these people talking. They don't even have a clear idea of what they mean by make it awkward. It's just, call out people who say racist stuff. That's it. No other plan, no idea, no criteria, except that if it's racist, or rather, if it's racist by what they would consider racist, because we all know it's only their standards that are in application here, but call it out and tell them that it's wrong, even if no one else thinks that it is. It's vague so that it can be applicable as needed, which is why this type of thing never leads to anything good, because you can make anything racist or sexist if you're willing to twist it around enough. The people on the regressive left, feminists, Black Lives Matter, etc., do it all the time. So where does this end? When are we done fighting people saying quote-unquote racist things to other people? Because if you can't even set your terms in the beginning, then how will you ever know you've come to the end? Why are you and yours the ones entitled to decide for everyone else what constitutes proper speech? And if you're going to say that you're not saying that, then you're lying, because somebody has to be. There must necessarily be someone that has to say on what is and is not okay to hear and say. And if it's not you who gets to decide, then who are you appointing, and why should we listen to them? I realize that it may have seemed earlier like I was just shitting on Don Iverson when I brought up the whole thing about defense, but it actually did have a purpose. See, this initiative that Jesse is trying to start up with the Don's help is giving moral license to this incompetent politician to think that he has the right to decide what is and is not okay speech. That Jesse is giving this to himself is bad enough, but he's giving this to the Don and the city's politicians as well, and to tell and chastise others for it. He and an entire committee couldn't figure out fancy bridgy keepy outy, but this is something that's totally in his wheelhouse. And this is not my imagination working overdrive here. This has actually already started to happen. Feminist Danielle Paradis has already come out with an article for Metro in response to and in support of the initiative, claiming that racism is a white person's problem, putting the onus on whites to deal with the issues of racism that she perceives as being systemic in society. Moreover, calling on city authorities and law enforcement to show that they have zero tolerance for what she calls hate groups. Now, I do agree with her that something should be done about hate groups. Feminism and Black Lives Matter are certainly a source of concern. But she thinks that the government and the police should be involved in doing this, not rational debate and factual discussion. Also, somehow when she says hate groups, I think she means something different than I do, but, racists never really think of themselves as hate peddlers. Right, Danielle? But Don, Jesse, here is a writer for a local media outlet expressing overt racist attitudes in response to your initiative, in support of it. and inviting the government to use its power to stop people that she doesn't like. Are you going to call that out, or even recognize it for the racism that it is? I'm guessing no, because looking at the website for Make It Awkward, I noticed this part of your fact. The onus is not on the victim of an attack to make it awkward. The onus is not on discriminated against people who feel that speaking up might negatively affect their well-being or job status. Rather, the onus is on employers, teachers, business owners, law enforcement, and institutions. The onus is on bystanders who feel safe stepping in or speaking up, and friends or family of attackers, or the people making racist or hateful comments or jokes. So it's up to you to decide what is acceptable to hear, but not up to you to do anything about it. That you defer to other authorities. The freedom riders were so dedicated to combating racism that they faced beatings, attempted murders, even people firebombing their buses in an attempt to roast them alive. You're not even willing to hear a few unpleasant words to fight for your so-called cause. You're not even willing to speak for yourselves for that. But you're perfectly willing to let others speak for you and do the hard work. Gosh, you're all so noble. I can see that your work will lead to great things for the human race. Now, Danielle's incessant ramblings, however, do raise a couple of points that I want to end this with. She mentions a case that occurred a couple of weeks ago in Saskatchewan, wherein a group of young First Nations people were in a car that popped a flat tire. So they pulled up onto a farm, and after one thing led to another, were attacked by the gun-wielding 54-year-old farmer. This resulted in the death of one of the young men, Colton Boucher. Danielle cites an article written by Andre Demise for Maclean's, which is less an article and more a virtue-signaling soapbox in written form, in which Demise gives a treatise on how this whole thing reflects on the horrible racism going on and how so many things need to be done, blah 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 blah, read it in below bar. And several other media sources have been calling this a racist shooting as well. Here's the thing though. As bad as the shooting is, I can't find any evidence being put forth that race had anything to do with it. There are no real details on the case known yet, other than they pulled up to the house, some sort of events happened that ended with the old farmer thinking they were a threat and opening fire. There is no evidence put forward as of yet that indicates a racial motivation. And if there was, I'm pretty sure these people would be proclaiming its existence to the high heavens. Now, of course, this could have been racially motivated. This could have been a case of a farmer making some sort of, racist judgment about a group of, young Indian men who just showed up on his farm at night. Or it could be any number of things. No one seems to know yet. Even the eyewitness accounts from the friends of the victim don't give a real picture of what happened. And none of it yet points to race being a factor. But that's not seemingly stopping these kinds of people. There was a white guy and a non-white guy, and the white guy shot the non-white guy, which is all that seems to matter to them. This is an example of how easily people will read discrimination and racism into things, even if the only benefit they get from it is a tingly feeling in their oppression spot. It's also why things like the RFE survey, which Danielle also references as proof of, racism in the country, or rather in the city, which is why things like the RFE survey are entirely pointless. The RFE survey is only a survey of what people perceive and interpret. It's absolutely useless data for anything but ideological legerdemain. The last thing I want to end this with is something else that I noticed when investigating this case on my own. After the case hit the news in Saskatchewan, there was a massive response on things like social media. Naturally, most of it was anger and vitriol coming from both sides about the racial implications, and of course, the race baiters were out in full force. There were several comments among the more racially aggressive ones that stuck out to me, though. Want to stop racism? Revamp those obsolete treaties and make every adult in Saskatchewan pay taxes. The very sad truth is that by being white, we can be discriminated upon more than any other race, and no one faces any repercussions. Now, both of these are fair points, and the first one especially is a sore point for many people who are not First Nations in this country, because there are special rules and privileges in place for them due to the original land treaties and the government trying to give guilt compensation for, taking the land. These 2 points, though, were subsequently dismissed as being the result of white bigots whining. And here's where I go back to my point about this whole make it awkward thing. Don and Jesse, they claim to want to start a conversation, as these SJW people always do. But why Grandpa still calls people from Mexico beaners is not the conversation. This here is the conversation. This is one of the places where the hate is coming from. This double standard wherein the minorities get special treatment because of something some ancestor did before they were a wiggler in the sperm sac. And when they say, hey, that's a double standard, and we're supposed to be trying to create an equal society, they get kicked in the balls and told to shut up. That their opinion doesn't matter because of their skin color, and that they are solely responsible for all of the ills of society. And that all they should do is help other people and be damned grateful for the opportunity. And the other side is constantly told that all of your problems come from these white devils who did this thing to your ancestors, that this society, which is bending over backwards to try and accommodate you, is actually oppressing you and discriminating against you because your life isn't as good as some hypothetical super white guy who only represents at best 1% of the white population, and that all of the stuff that we've given you to ease our consciences hasn't had some kind of deleterious effect on you. No, not at all. Remember, this started because one rich black guy got called a nigger. And from that one event, the entire country has come out in support of him and decrying the racism that caused it, and has been fully supported by the media. And this is supposed to convince us all that racism is a problem in this country. Who are they fucking kidding? This is the kind of conversation that you really should be having, Don and Jesse. This is the kind of conversation that you won't have. Okay, that's enough of this. I'm done. What's up next? Can't be any stupider than this.
So, I'm a dude, right? I'm a cis dude, and I'm also a feminist. But wait, doesn't that mean you hate men?
I have been known to be wrong on occasion, though.